Here I am. I'm sitting down with Kabeer, Reform member,
Yeah, well, branch chairman for
branch chairman
Norfolk. Yeah.
for Mid Norfolk. Okay, then Kabeer, tell me about you. Tell me about your early life and your career. What led you to Reform? We'll go with that.
Well, where do I start? I mean, I've been interested in politics from a very young age. I was 12 years old when my mum kept me up all night watching Bill Clinton get elected.
All right, yeah.
And so she was always, my parents were always interested in politics. Obviously, growing up in Northern Ireland, you can't escape it because it was something that people talked about regularly. But I really kind of got into politics when I was about 16.
Right.
A GCSE English coursework which said, go and pick up a newspaper and get a for and against argument and then produce it in an English paper. So picked up the newspaper and there was an article about whether or not Britain should join the Euro. And from that moment, I was hooked. I was absolutely obsessed with the whole idea of Europe, what it meant, what it could be, what it wouldn't be, and how it was going to form over the years. And at that time, I was actually in favour of it. As I grew older, I then studied A-level politics, studied economics, went to university, studied international business. And during this time, obviously, the Euro started to evolve into what it's become today. The EU evolved into what it became today.
Yeah, sorry, just to interject. Originally, it was for this. They sold it as for trade, as a market.
Yes, yeah. I think that was, ultimately when the EU was born in 1992, the new incarnation of it. It was all about a single market, and that had lots of benefits in Northern Ireland. The border came down, and we were able to go across the border, and suddenly we were getting a motorway across the border. And where it used to take us 4 hours to get to Dublin, suddenly we could get there in 2.5 hours.
Right.
And so we could see those benefits, and we could see that it didn't matter if you were British or Irish, if you were part of a European state. What then subsequently happened was there was the EU constitution referendum in France and Netherlands where they voted no. And the EU decided, no, we're going to apply on anyway. We're going to rebadge it as the Lisbon Treaty. We're going to have all of the integration and federalist ideas still in place, but without any of the democratic accountability.
Right.
And that was the first alarm bell for me. And then obviously prior to that, the Nice Treaty had been voted against by the Irish. They were told to vote again until they gave the right answer. The Lisbon Treaty...
Like Brexit.
Yeah, exactly. So the Lisbon Treaty was the same. The Irish were told, they voted no. They were told to vote again until you get the right answer. And so I started to realise that this is not what I envisaged it would be. It wasn't democratic, and it was bringing in a kind of authoritarianism, or the beginnings of an authoritarianism that was really went against everything that I believed in. So that's when I started to turn against the EU and what it stood for. So it was always kind of, on the Brexit side of things. I went to see Nigel Farage in 2014 when he visited Stormont.
Yeah.
And we would have voted UKIP in that election, but for the fact that they weren't standing in Northern Ireland at the time. So come 2015, and David Cameron promised a referendum if the Conservatives won. I actually didn't just vote Conservative, I helped the Conservative candidate for East Londonderry, a lady called Liz and Claire Legg. And obviously David Cameron won, and we got our referendum and we were out. And then obviously everything that happened after that happened, where the establishment just fought against it tooth and nail. And so I was quite discouraged and despondent at the way that happened. I was still, loosely a Conservative, but very suspicious of Boris and obviously, everything that came after him. And the final straw for me was when Rishi Sunak banned shale gas in the middle of the worst energy crisis since 1973, as soon as he became Prime Minister. And that's when I decided I could no longer sit and shout at the TV. It was time to stand up and get involved, because I couldn't see that there was going to be change and that these problems were going to be fixed anytime soon. And so I just felt compelled to get involved. So I went online and looked for which party I thought would suit me best.
Yeah.
And there was, a number of startups. There was Reform, there was Reclaim at the time. There was a few others.
Lawrence Fox, isn't it?
That was Lawrence Fox's party. So I looked at them, looked at Reform, and Reform was the one party that just had all of their policies I agreed with.
Whole hog, 100%, everything.
100% every single policy I read, I agreed with, and I thought, no, this is the party for me. So I applied to be a candidate. They interviewed me very quickly, did an interview on Teams with two Scottish fellows, and as soon as that interview was over, they basically said, you're going to be a candidate. They got Gawain Towler, who was the press secretary at that time.
Yeah.
He got in touch with me the next day, did an interview with the Guardian, and then I was straight up to Doncaster for a training event with 100 other hopefuls. And it was at that event that I realised this is my home. This is my home, because I met the other people who were there, who'd been placed, who'd been chosen as candidates, and I found a huge diversity of opinion and thought and backgrounds. Not just your kind of ex-Tory toff, but ex-Labour people. There was Indian people, there was black people, there was gay people, there was all sorts of backgrounds. There was men, there was women, and I really felt at home. The one thing that everyone did have in common was a real passion to get things done. What I loved about it, and I still talk about this to this day, is there was nothing fancy about that. It was an old town hall in the north of England with cheese pizzas and orange squash.
Can't beat a cheese pizza.
But what I loved about it was just no airs and graces. Everybody was there to get a job done, and we got stuck in, and that contrasts enormously with what I experienced with the Conservatives in 2015, where it was all about the TV show, it was all about looks, it was all about who you knew, and looking good for the cameras. And I very rarely met anyone in the Conservatives that was actually passionate about policy. So it was a real journey for me, from getting in politics, first of all, in 2015 to actually joining Reform in 2022. But once I did it, I didn't look back. And then from then on, stood for the party in the local elections in 2023, stood in the general election in 2024, and came close. We got 20% of the vote, 9,500 votes. George Freeman, the Conservative, won with 16,500. But it was the first time he'd really ever had to campaign in an election. Prior to that, the Conservative just walked every election around here. So since then, I've been I set up the branch for Mid Norfolk, and we have been campaigning in every by-election that's come along. Up until now, they've all been town council by-elections, and we've won every single one. So we've had 3 in Attleborough Town Council, we've had 1 in Dereham, and we've had a couple of people co-opted into the Watton Town Council. So every single by-election we've contested, we've won, and we've done a lot to raise funds as well. So we're in a really good place now, having set up the branch where we've got 50 to 70 volunteers who regularly come out and help with leaflets, and we're building towards 2029.
Amazing. So the tide is definitely turning. It's going turquoise.
It absolutely is. So all the indications are that the Conservative vote is completely collapsed. I think the few Conservatives voters that are left are going to realise over time that, if they want to keep Labour out, they need to vote Reform. So that's certainly what we're starting to hear and see in the ground. There was a by-election in Surrey last night, which is real Conservative heartlands, and Reform won again and replaced the Conservatives. So I think if we're winning in places like Surrey and Hertfordshire, then we're certainly going to win in places like Norfolk.
Okay. So I just want to circle back on one of those points that you made. I want to ask. The Guardian interviewed you.
Yes.
Traditionally what people would say is a left-wing paper.
Yes.
And people are saying that Reform are the new Tories.
Yes.
What would you say to that statement? Would you say that Reform are the new Tories?
No, I would say we're different. I would say that the political spectrum is changing. Okay, the political spectrum changes, every couple of generations, and we went from, I think when if you think post Second World War, this is when this phrase "one nation conservative" first came about. The Conservatives became very left wing. There wasn't much between Labour and Conservatives. Who changed that? It was Thatcher. Okay, so Thatcher came in with Milton Friedman, Austrian economics, monetarist economics, where very much in favour of the free market, unleashed the talents of Britain, and started the recovery from the 60s and 70s, which had been awful. And from that moment, the political spectrum was about taxation. It was all about taxation, and it was tax and spend. If you were conservative, you were right wing on the economic spectrum.
Right.
If you were Labour, you were left wing on the economic spectrum, and that was the big dividing line through the 80s, 90s, until really Tony Blair. And Tony Blair kind of parked his lawns on the Conservatives, or parked his tanks in the Conservatives' lawns, where he basically said, came up with the phrase "the third way," which Bill Clinton did as well. The third way was, no, we harness the power of the market, and we're going to, embrace globalization. We're going to embrace free trade as a left-wing idea, and we're going to use the money generated to redistribute wealth to those at the bottom. So from then, it changed again, and I think now, since Brexit, we're going through another change where it's less about tax and spend, although there is, clearly still a dividing line between Labour and the right, the left and the right on tax and spend, but it's much more about cultural and social issues now.
Yeah.
And that's why I think immigration for people is more important of an issue, because of the way they see culture changing. And culture obviously has a knock-on effect in the economy.
Yeah.
If we have millions of people coming to this country who don't subscribe to British culture, then that will in itself change the economy and the way the economy works. It'll change the way people behave. It'll change the way people vote. So I think that the cultural dividing line is now more important in the political spectrum. And so where the Conservatives previously were a broad church that brought in cultural conservatives as well as people on the left culturally, people like David Cameron and his Hug a Hoodie and his A-lists of ethnic minorities and gay people and all the rest of it. He was kind of straddling both sides of the spectrum socially, whilst being in one place economically. Reform are not that. Reform are very much social conservatives primarily. Right. And so we're not, we don't have any of those social liberal people at all in the party, but we do have a variety of opinions when it comes to tax and spend. Okay, so I'm not a Jacob Rees-Mogg when it comes to absolute very flat taxes, or I wouldn't be in favour of flat taxes. I wouldn't be in favour of some of the more extreme free trade policies put forward by people like Patrick Minford. He would have unilateral zero tariffs on the whole world. So when it comes to people like that, I guess you could say I'm to the left of those people. But when it comes to social issues, we're 100% united in reform on the right. And so that's where we differ from the Conservatives, where they are a broad spectrum when it comes to social issues. We aren't. We're very much social conservatives.
Okay. So I'm going to ask, but we touched on it earlier. Which way did you vote in Brexit?
Leave, yeah.
What was your reason for that?
It was primarily, I guess it's hard to say that there was one reason. I thought we'd be better off as a country for a number of reasons. Immigration being one of them, because immigration, it's not just the social issues with immigration, it's the economic issues as well. I feel that the most successful economies around the world are people who have control of their immigration, they control the type of people that come to this country. And I felt that being part of the EU, we had no control over the type of people coming in from Europe. We could still control people coming in from the rest of the world, but not from Europe. And I felt that the mass unskilled immigration was putting pressure on the benefit system, not for unemployment benefit, but tax credits and all the top-ups that people get even when they're in work, because a lot of people are coming in doing low-skilled jobs, working in meat factories and the types of jobs that aren't popular with British people, and those jobs were only enabled at that wage rate because of the subsidy that we were adding in on universal credit, or as it was known then, child tax credits and working tax credits. So I felt that was causing a huge distortion in the UK economy, which was encouraging, non-productive industries that otherwise would have gone abroad. And actually what we need to do and focus in this country is on high wage activities like technology, artificial intelligence, and all of the different things that are scalable, like financial services, etc. And we've seen the results of that. We've seen since 2007, 2006, we've seen our productivity in this country has been completely flat, and that completely coincides with immigration going through the roof. Where it used to be less than 100,000, it went to 300, 400, 500,000, and now it's annually 70, 800,000 sometimes. So it's not sustainable. It's putting pressure on house prices. It's putting downward pressure on wages. And so that was, for me, an economic and a social issue. But also, I'm a great believer in democracy. I think you need democratic accountability for decision makers.
Yeah.
One of my biggest bugbears is the fact that in Westminster it seems to be run by the civil service. The minister's treated like a TV show. The decisions are made for them, and they come to cabinet and basically read from a script. And that's not democracy. Democracy is your elected MP gets into government, is making decisions, gets around the table, and hashes out the best way forward. As we saw in the 80s, we all remember Michael Heseltine walking out of the cabinet, falling out with his colleagues. That's because in the cabinet they were having real decisions. They were actually having real debates and discussing things and how to go forward. That's all gone. Now it's a TV show. And we need to bring some of that back. And Brexit was the first start of that, but it was just the first step in a very long process. We've got to unwind a lot of the things that Tony Blair put in place. The Supreme Court has really changed the judiciary and politicised it. It's taken away the accountability for judges that used to be there from the law lords, as well as the explosion in quangos and non-governmental organisations like Ofcom and Ofwat, and many of whom don't do a very good job, many of whom get involved in our lives in ways that we can't see and are not accountable to the people. So the decision-making powers have been completely taken away from the people. We need to bring that back. It started with Brexit, bringing it back from Brussels. Now we've got to take the power back from the quangos and the NGOs back into Westminster so that the people that we elect actually have the ability to change things.
What's your view on Keir Starmer?
Keir Starmer is lost. He's a lost little boy who hasn't got a clue. He's stumbled his way into the leadership of the Labour Party. I think he's completely disingenuous. He pretended to be in favour of everything that Corbyn stood for in terms of staying part of that shadow cabinet. He's now, pivoted since then, just in order to be, popular with the electorate. People accuse us of being populist, but really Keir Starmer is the epitome of what it means to be populist. He changes what he says in order to gain votes. And actually what we have in Reform is people who genuinely believe what they say, they stick to their principles, and you can see that consistency, whether it's Nigel Farage or Richard Tice or David Bull or anyone else. You can see a consistency in principles over the years, and they don't just change with the wind. So for me, Labour are the populists. Keir Starmer is the populist in chief. He actually doesn't believe half the things he says. He is primarily a lawyer. He treats governance like a lawyer would, in the way that he governs. He thinks that he can fix every problem by creating legislation, as opposed to getting out into society and seeing what decisions need to be made in order to fix things. So he's a lawyer who's lost. He's lost his way. He doesn't know how to run the media. He doesn't know how to run a good campaign. He lucked his way into government because the Tory vote collapsed, and it was just quick. The election was quick enough that Reform couldn't really challenge, I think, and that's why Sunak called it early. Had he left it a bit later, I think we would have had more time. We might have posed a much bigger challenge to Labour, but Sunak called it early in order to try and save the Conservative Party from complete collapse, and Keir Starmer was the principal beneficiary. So I don't consider him to be a skilled politician or a skilled Prime Minister. I think he's very knowledgeable when it comes to the law. I don't think he understands how working people in this country feel or the pressures that they're under.
There's been several chants. I've been at some of the protests recently, and there's been chants using expletives and Keir Starmer's name. I don't think he gets the people. Do you think Nigel Farage gets the people?
I think he does, because he's come through. He might not be from working class stock himself, But he has spent so much time over the decades around working people, listening to them, listening to their concerns, that he really, he has become a man of the people, and he's always been the type that would quite happily walk into any pub, sit down and have a chat.
Yeah, I've seen pictures of him having a beer outside of a pub in Hull. And even, I know someone will kick off about this, but having a cigarette and stuff, people go to the pub for a fag and a beer, don't they? I don't think that's a big deal. And I've never seen any other politician do that.
No,
actually.
No, I think you might have seen them, but they don't. It doesn't come natural to them.
No, whereas he seems to be really at ease in those pictures.
Yeah.
What was Graham Trowler like?
What was Graham Trowler like? He's fantastic. I have so much respect for that man. He's been so supportive. When we've run events, he's always volunteered to come and speak. And he came to our Norfolk rally that we held in March. He was going to come to a garden party, but he ended up getting offered a job somewhere. So he's been very supportive of me. He's been very supportive of reform in general. Even when he no longer had his job in the party, he continued to support the branches. He continued to give advice, and really, I think he's great. I've got so much admiration for him. I'm really pleased he's been elected to the board. I think that he's somebody that knows what's happening on the ground. He understands how headquarters work, and he's a perfect link between the branches and headquarters. And I think Darren Grimes is as well. So I'm not familiar with this.
Oh yeah, Darren was elected as well recently, wasn't he?
Darren was elected as well. There was a third guy who I'm not familiar with, so I can't speak to his experience, but I know that Darren and Gwen in particular will be a great addition. Okay,
so we've touched on Farage, and he's at ease with the people. Is reform bigger than Nigel Farage?
Yes, absolutely. And this is something that a lot of people haven't quite realised yet. I think that because of the experience of UKIP, the Brexit Party, and reform, people see Nigel joins, popularity goes through the roof, he has success, and then he's on to the next thing. This is different. It's much more broad-based because the emergency that this country faces requires it to be. There are so many people who have come out of the woodwork, who are business people, extremely busy, they have families, and they just wouldn't normally have time to commit to public service, who are in reform making a difference. And I include myself in that because I've got 2 young kids. I've got an extremely high pressure job that is 50 to 60 hours a week with a lot of travelling, and yet I'm giving all of my weekends up to do this. And it's the same for a lot of people. We've recently had a chairman in South Norfolk come in, a guy called Chris Apps, and he's very similar. He's running a big business. He's got a family, and he's getting involved, or he's deputy chairman. So he's, we see this all around. I see this everywhere. It's much bigger than Nigel. We were at between 10 and 14% in the polls even before Nigel came along. Granted, we've got to 34% at our peak, and we're hovering between 30 and 34% now in the polls. And a lot of that is thanks to Nigel, and I have so much respect for Nigel, so I don't want this to be taken the wrong way. I think he is crucial to getting us into government. But the broad base of talent that we have coming forward means that once we do get into government, we will have a lot of resources to pull on, and then the next generation is already being built. There's lots of young people in the party who've got a great future, who are starting to make themselves known, starting to get experience, and then when the time comes for Nigel to pass the baton on, whenever that may be, the party is there, the infrastructure is there, the talent is there. This is not UKIP, it's not the Brexit Party, it's much bigger than that.
Do you think Nigel Farage will be in number 10, or do you think he'll pass the baton beforehand?
Oh, I think he'll be in number 10. Yeah, I think he's still quite young. When you consider the age of people like Trump and certainly Joe Biden.
Joe Biden was definitely an older chap.
He was definitely an older chap. No, I think he will get into number 10. I think he's even. I mean, he's so energetic that I think he's capable of 2 terms if we can get re-elected.
Really,
I really do. I think that he's got so much experience, and he's been right on so many things. His political judgment on things when it wasn't popular. I rewatched a clip from the 2009 UKIP conference when he talked about the announcement that was made in 2008 by George W. Bush and Angela Merkel and the British government at the time about Ukraine, and he was talking in 2009 back then about the impact that would have, and that it was potentially going to lead to a war between Russia and Ukraine. He was absolutely right. I first came across Nigel when I was, I think this was, it was 2012 during the European sovereign debt crisis, when it all blew up and Greek government debt went to 30%. Italian government debt was well past 11-12%. That's catastrophic for those countries. And all these YouTube videos started to surface in 2012 from 2009 of Nigel Farage in the European Parliament talking about the spread between German debt and Greek debt. And at that stage, the spread was, the German debt was maybe 1.5%, and the Greek debt had gone to 2.2%. And because of Nigel's experience in fixed income, he knew and could see that this divergence was going to cause ruptures later on. And so he called that in 2009. It blew up in 2012. He called Russia and Ukraine in 2009. It obviously blew up in 2014 and then again in 2022. So he has got an incredible antenna when it comes to the political winds, what way they're going, and he can see things before a lot of people can see them. So, and that is one of the most important aspects for a leader to have, or attributes. And that's where he is, I think, second to none in British politics. I can't think of another politician that has been as foresighted as he has on all of these issues, whether it's sovereign debt, immigration, or Ukraine, Russia, and everything else. He can see things coming a mile away, and it's that political judgment that you need when it comes to doing things which might be perceived to be unpopular. Thatcher had that when it came to the Falklands War. A lot of people at the time thought that Britain was going to fight that war because Britain was this was post IMF bailout Britain. Yeah. This was post Suez Britain, which had been completely embarrassed on the world stage. And so when the Argentinians went into the Falklands, they had absolutely no expectation that the British were going to defend it. She stood up and did it, and it was absolutely the right thing to do. And that was at a time when most people would not have predicted that. So I think that she had that kind of judgment. That's the kind of judgment that Farage has. He's that foresighted. And so even if he does get to the stage of wanting to take more of a back seat, I absolutely want him to continue to be involved in the party, directing and leading and advising whoever takes over, because his insight and foresight will be needed.
So we've said that, you've made reference to Thatcher a couple of times. I think she was called the Iron Lady?
Yeah.
Would you say Farage is the Iron Man? And I don't mean Tony Stark. Is he the equivalent, would you say?
I've not heard that before. I think it's, I wouldn't say he's a direct equivalent. I think in terms, is he an equivalent? In some ways he is. Right. Because he is the defining politician of his era. Yeah. Thatcher was the defining politician of her era. You could say Tony Blair was as well. Though not, I would
credit where credit's due, I guess.
Yeah, I wouldn't say in a good way. But I think Farage is the defining politician of his era. Are they the same in terms of what they believe? No, I think there's some differences there. Reform is not just another Thatcherite party. We are much more rooted in the working classes than the Conservative Party ever were or ever will be. And so I do think there's a difference there. I think that, there was lots of mistakes that Thatcher made, but you'll never get anybody making 100% correct decisions. If you can make 80% of the decisions correctly, I think that's as good as it gets. And so I think that he's the best placed person to do that. So is he like Thatcher in that way? Yes. But is he the Iron Man? I guess we could try that. Let's see if that catches on.
Maybe a turquoise Iron Man suit, that might work. Maybe. So it has been said, not on camera to me, but people have said Labour aren't for working people anymore. The Conservatives aren't conserving. Obviously, Reform want to reform the UK. Why are they rooted in the working classes as much as they are?
I think that the working classes in this country are sick and tired of being ignored. Okay, they've I guess you could say, Labour were the party of the working classes until Tony Blair came along. Really, he's the one that changed that, and he's the one that took them to a very different place. And since then, they've just not been represented. I think that globalisation has had its benefits, but it has hammered the working classes in countries like the UK and the US. We've seen that in the Rust Belt in America, and we've seen it in Labour heartlands in the UK. North of England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland were the industrial heartlands that suffered most from globalisation and Thatcherism. So, we've come along at a time when people are fed up with Labour because they've not revived those communities. They've not looked after working classes. And most of those people are, whilst they are working class and might not be right-wing economically, they are social conservatives and they're fiercely proud of their country. They're the sort of people that will stand up and defend this country should it be required, and they've been forgotten. And it's not just people, ex-coal miners. I'm talking about the police. I'm talking about veterans. I'm talking about all those people who go into public service to bat for this country and are completely ignored when it comes to public policy and forgotten about. There are so many police that I speak to who are so fed up with the way the police has been run at the minute, and I don't blame them one bit. In fact, in my job, I recruit people into financial services, and the most recent person I interviewed was an ex-police officer who's leaving the police force because of the way it's been run. And he's somebody who's had great success in catching, county lines, drug gangs, and tracking people who are coming into the country. And what he said to me, when I asked him why is he leaving the police to get into financial services, he said to me, he's just sick and tired of seeing the same people caught and released. And many of them are foreign nationals who come in and once they launch their appeals against deportation, nothing happens. The whole court system's gummed up, and so they go through the appeals process. They're out on remand, and they basically have a free rein to continue to commit crimes.
That's awful.
And so he's just so despondent at it that he wants to get out. And so I think that it's not surprising to hear that, because we've heard it so much in the media, but it is just one example of how the working people of this country have been ignored. And we've seen that, with all of the grooming gang stories and everything else. There's too many politicians who ignore what's going on the ground.
Okay, so thank you for your time today. I've really appreciated this. Just for a final thought, or a final question even, why should people vote Reform?
The number one reason to vote Reform is to save this country. If you believe in family, community and country, those things are all under threat. The identity that we have in this country, the values that we have are under threat. The institutions in Westminster are destroying our way of life, and they've destroyed the accountability for Westminster politicians. If we're going to save this country, we need to bring back a more direct form of democracy where your politicians can actually decide and change things. And we need to do it before it's too late. The sovereign debt crisis, in my view, is one of the biggest problems we face. There is a tipping point that we can reach where we turn into Argentina. I don't want that to happen. I think that we can save this country. I don't think it's too late. And I want people to vote for us because we have none of the baggage that the other parties from all of their terrible decisions over the last 25 years. We can change things and say, this is the way we're going to do it. And we can listen to people on the ground, and we can change direction quickly when required. We are a startup party with a startup framework, which means that we can be agile in this changing political environment. And so we will respond to changing needs as those needs change. we know everyone knows what we stand for. We talk about it all the time. Visit my website, kabeer.kher.com, if you want to know what I believe. But I genuinely believe it's the last chance to save Britain. And so that would be why you should vote Reform.
Brilliant. Thank you.